you're organizing this. So, okay, so we're just thinking our motivation, as the lamas would say, we might say, what's our purpose? Why are we here together for this 1 hour? Well, it's to look at this, the Buddhist view about impermanence, specifically about death. And I think, and then in particular, of course, because I'm Tibetan Buddhist, and our lineage is the Vajrayana, coming from the great monastic university system in Tibet, which directly comes from the great Nalanda monastery tradition. As His Holiness always says, we are the Nalanda tradition. So this is, we're going to discuss it from the point of view of the sutra teachings, but it's also the Vajrayana, the death process itself, which is very fascinating. So the reason to listen, of course, the reason to listen is to think, wow, that's interesting. I can take some tools from this to help me. That's the point. It's advice. It's advice, you know. So, okay. So there are two ways of looking at impermanence and death from the Buddha's teachings. The first one, as we all know, if we've studied any Buddhist teachings anywhere, the very first thing we're going to hear Buddha tell us is that things are impermanent. Things change moment by moment. So this is sort of fairly obvious, isn't it? You don't need, it's not religion. It's not as if Buddha invented impermanence and then plonked impermanence on top of things. Buddha, not being a creator, of course, is not a person who makes things up. He's observed things. So it's fairly evident that things change. But it's kind of interesting in the Lam Rim, if we're Tibetan Buddhists and if we've studied this packaging of the Buddha's teachings, this path to Buddhahood, it's kind of interesting that the very first entry level, grade 1, first teaching, before we even start to actually kind of abide by the laws of karma and practice, it's to think about impermanence and death. So this is coming from Atisha, this marvelous Indian scholar, saint, yogi, who spent the last 15, 17 or whatever years of his life in Tibet, 11th century or something, 12th century, I forget. And he put together this little packaging of Buddhist teachings. And the very first thing is think about impermanence and death. So why? What's his agenda? What's the purpose for this? First of all, he's pointing out what is true anyway, but the reason right at the beginning to think about impermanence and death is to give us the energy, not to kind of give us the wake-up call, not to waste this life. That's the point, to give us the wake-up call, not to waste this life. So what does that mean? If we have the Buddhist view, we have the view of karma, which means our mind comes from before, programmed with our past tendencies, and we come into this life, and then every single thing we think and do and say in this life programs our mind that will then produce the next person. We are our own producers. I remember His Holiness the Dalai Lama saying one time that the law of karma is like self-creation. And it's a really beautiful view, a brilliant idea. I mean, it's a marvelous view. That's the Buddha's view. It's his observation. We're not made by some creator. Mummy and daddy give us a body, but they absolutely do not give us our mind. They do not give us our tendencies, our characteristics. We bring these with us from the past and we carry them forward into the future. So then the very first thing is to sort of get this wake-up call, a sense of urgency, not to waste this life. So there are, as we know in the teachings, Atisha points out, there are 3 essential points, like 3 bullet points, and there are various sub-points under those. The essential first point is, he says, we need to become familiar with a simple, evident fact that we are impermanent, that we are going to die. So this is even if we're good Buddhists, even if we're good Christians or whatever, it's kind of shocking. We don't like thinking about this. It's pretty clear, isn't it? And so why? Is because we have this primordial attachment to me and to mine. And then because of this, we then can't stand the thought of me finishing and mine finishing. So we kind of dump this lie on top of everything, that things are set in stone. I mean, we can see in daily life, forget about death. We can see in daily life, one of the main reasons we suffer is because we can't stand things changing. Well, we can't stand good things changing. We love it when bad things change. But we've got this very strong view, as Lama Zopa puts it, grasping at permanent me. One of the mistakes we make, Buddha talks about, is grasping at things as permanent, meaning unchanging, not changing, not dynamic, So the very first point is, and how do you meditate, quote unquote, on this? It sounds a bit mystical, meditate on the fact that you're going to die. All it means is think about it, observe it, notice it. not necessarily on your cushion, in daily life. The evidence is everywhere from the second you wake up in the morning, you know, especially in India, which is like Jurassic Park in the rainy season, all these creatures around you, you know, living and dying in front of you, not to mention your family, next door neighbors, not to mention the people in the news. So it's pretty evident. But the key point here is it's going to happen to me. There's this wonderful text, I don't know, perhaps you know it. It used to be called The Heart Spoon. It's by Pavanka Rinpoche, and this kind of meditative verses about impermanence. And the last line in many of the verses is, this will happen to me. This will happen to you. This will happen to me. That's the key point. We know about impermanence, but it doesn't touch us, does it, until it gets close? Like until our beloveds die or our pet dies. But even then, we still don't get it. We've got to say, this will happen to me. You know, death is something out there, isn't it? It's very comfortable. And we're kind of like this, there's this kind of hubris. Phew, I'm glad it's not me. But it will be. And this is the most powerful one. This will happen to me. Now, this leads us naturally to the second step, the second bullet point, which should actually scare the life out of us, which should really give us the wake-up call. Which is, yes, death is definite, but the time of death is absolutely not definite. Unless you're clairvoyant, you know. Unless you're clairvoyant, you have absolutely no idea when you're going to die. But because we can't stand the thought of death, we think it's a long way off, you know. You get up every morning. It's like, you know, one good way of thinking about the dynamic thing of death is indefinite, the time of it's indefinite, is that every second, we're moving towards death every day. It's a really good way to think. Like if you go on a journey, even if it's 1 mile, you know, from the second you get in the car, you're moving forward. You're getting closer to the goal and further away from where you left. We know that. It's a very strong feeling. You know how long an hour takes. But when it comes to daily life, we wake up every morning as if I'm the same person as yesterday, you know. Yes, I'm going to die, but sort of like death, which is the goal, is one way of thinking about it. You know, we keep thinking death keeps moving forward. The feeling every time you wake up and look in the mirror and you know you're older than you were yesterday, you know you're older than you were 20 years ago, but there's still a feeling that death is just as far away as it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And that's just fantasy, that we've made that up. That's a complete concept. And we believe, because we can't stand the thought of it. So we're living in denial of reality. And one way of saying what Buddha's saying about why we suffer is we're not living in touch with reality. This is a perfect way to put it. He says we're living in la la land. We have all these misconceptions in our mind, you know. So of course, this is the third point, the conclusion. Okay, then, at the time of death, at that moment, this is the key point. At that moment, what is important for me? What is useful? In other words, what can I bring with me? Put it that way. What can I bring with me, you know? Well, you can't bring your hubby, your house, your pension plan, your next door neighbors, your worries, your dramas, you know, all your jewelry, your things. I mean, it's such a cliche, but we've got to remind ourselves every day we think about this, we get the wake-up call. We just don't treat it like a joke. You know you can't. It's not a possibility. You cannot bring this body with you. So what's left? Your mind. And in the mind, what's useful? Well, our deluded states of mind are not useful. The karmic imprints of negativity are not useful. So it's a practical issue. It's like you got a flight tonight, like those I always think of those Afghani refugees, you know. They had to pack one small bag, and probably even that got lost because they had a sense of urgency. Their goal was to get the hell to that airport and get on a plane and get out of that country. They left everything behind. So it's a great practice to even think like this, you know. So, of course, why death is so fearful, as Lama Zopa says, is a marvelous book, which I was so fortunate to edit, and we're going to discuss this now, there was an earlier version of it, but now it's a paperback, and Wisdom published it, and I think you can get it, I think it's a digital book now too, but it's an incredibly helpful book. It's a handbook, it's a brilliant book. It's perfect. It's called How to Face Death Without Fear. And it's, as Rinpoche says in that book, you know, many things, of course, is a big fat book, is, you know, if you're going to help anybody in this life, when they need you most is at the time of death. And it's a practical issue. It's a practical issue because he says, as he says, the main reason there is so much fear at death is because of attachment, and mostly attachment to this, me, especially the body, because that's what we think is me. Primordial, deepest ingrained attachment, this horror of losing it, horror. And it's just inarticulate for us. We don't actually analyze it, you know. So the one way to prepare for death is by living your life in the framework of death is definite, time of death is uncertain, and then what is important in the time of death, and it comes down to the only thing that is of any use when my mind leaves my body is the virtuous karmic imprints in my mind. That's it. So obviously that then tells us we better start practicing. But it's the logical kind of analysis we have to do, you know. But because the grasping at permanent me is so strong, I mean, I've been saying these words. I'm a Buddhist nun. I've got this job from Lama Zopa to talk about this stuff. I say these with great sincerity, but I tell you, I still don't believe it. When I say I could die today, I do not believe it, I promise. And this is how deep the delusions are. You say it with confidence. I know intellectually it's absolutely true, but to have a realization, even just of impermanence, is already pretty profound, you know. And why it is difficult, because these imprints, the tendencies in our mind are so deep. We've got to realize that, and that'll make us a bit more humble, you know. The tendencies of these misconceptions are deep in the bones of our being. We even can intellectually, I mean, impermanence is not like emptiness, it's evident. It's completely an evident truth. But it's so hard to see it because we're so much grasping, so much attachment, so much, you know, we're digging deep into all the daily appearances of daily life, especially we have husbands and families and children and money and houses and dogs. And it's like makes it so difficult for us, you know. So, I mean, and this is the interesting point. That's why there's so much fear, because we can't bear the thought that even they, forget about me, that they are impermanent, you know. So this doesn't mean you become nihilistic. And this is the other extreme. Because we can't stand to think about impermanence, then we do think, well, things are impermanent. Then we become nihilistic. Oh, well, you're going to die. What's the point of doing anything? I'm going to die. What's the point? That's not the conclusion either. The fact is, impermanence is normal, is natural. So we've got to kind of notice it. And then once you get in touch with it, then it's kind of implicit in everything you think and do and say. It's implicit, this realization that everything's impermanent. And the conclusion isn't, oh, well, why bother? The conclusion is, I mustn't waste it. That's the conclusion. We've got to practice that. You know, it's like, this is the point. It's not, this is the easiest one, because we suddenly discover that things are impermanent. We get shocked. Then we think, well, if my husband's going to die today, if I'm going to die today, if you're going to die today, we naturally think, well, why bother? Then we become nihilistic and we'll sit back and twiddle our thumbs and wait for death. That's nihilism. That's absurd. That is not the conclusion. The reality is everything is impermanent. It's only because we're waking up to it now. It's a surprise to us. The conclusion is, therefore, I must not waste this precious moment. Therefore, I must not waste this life. I must not waste this opportunity. And then you get a sense of urgency. And then you become joyful, because now you realize reality and you recognize, and therefore you're not afraid of impermanence. This is the way to live our lives. It's absolutely enormous. It's huge. Without this, even knowing about the death process, which I'll now describe, it's not so helpful. You know, we've got to realize we've got to live within the reality that I am my own being, my mind, my body, my everything, my life, my possessions are changing moment by moment, changing moment by moment. Then when you're more in sync with reality, that's when there's no fear. The fear is there because we're living in denial of it. Seeing the reality of it, then you relax, you know, then you're in touch with reality. You're not afraid. Then death will be a happy experience. So, okay, let's talk about the death process itself. This is very fascinating. And this is from the Vajrayana teachings, which are absolutely marvelous. You know, I mean, there's such clarity in understanding this it's like this technology. It's so fascinating. I don't know what the sutra teachings, they talk about different things, but this is certainly from the Vajrayana. It's most helpful. And there are some marvelous books published. So Lama Zopa's, for example, and then there's another one by His Holiness, which is a commentary on one of Panchen Lama's texts. I think it's edited and translated by Jeffrey Hopkins. I think it's called the Mind of Clear Light or something, but it's a commentary on this death process. It's really excellent. Okay, so the death process itself is described in terms of 8 stages of this gradual deconstruction of the components that make up a person. So, of course, being the Vajrayana model, we're describing the physical matter, which is made of the 4 elements. It's just the way the universe is according to this model. The entire physical universe is constructed of the 4 elements. And that's how we used to talk about 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago in the materialist world, in the European models. The Ayurvedic system, the Chinese system, they still talk about the 4 elements. And so indeed does the Vajrayana. And the Tibetan medical system is based on this. So the matter is made of the 4 elements, and then we have a mind. So it happens to be, that, and this is just the way it is, that in the Vajrayana, according to the Vajrayana, all minds, which are beginningless, are inextricably connected to their own set of the 4 elements. It's just the way it is. So the death process is the gradual breaking down of these components and the separating of the mind from those physical components, So it's described in great detail, and Rinpoche talks about it in the book, and the sort of about 25 different things that happen throughout these 8 stages. So that one of the major meditations we need to do is to become familiar with this process, just to become familiar with it. Read it, think about it, imagine it. In this book, for example, the last 2/3 of this book of Lama's Opus are basically all these different practices that he recommends. They're all numbered from 1 to 87. The mantras, the sutras, so many things he recommends, and including a meditation on the death process. So then, of course, by living your life in the framework of impermanence, realizing you're going to die, recognizing you don't want to waste your life, so you make the most of every day, living joyfully, and then when you wake up tomorrow morning, it's a bonus, you're still alive, so you use the next day as well, and realize everything around you is impermanent. But you also become familiar with this process. It's really helpful. And in particular, of course, there's a chapter in the book called Death is What the Yogis Have Been Waiting For. It sounds hilarious, doesn't it? But it's absolutely perfect, because the way, all the meditations, Rinpoche describes this, all the Vajrayana, the highest yoga tantra practices, if you've taken empowerment into something like Kala Chakra or Hevajra or Vajrayogini or the highest yoga tantra practices, the way these sadhanas are constructed is, the practice, it combines the practice of the deity practices with the process of death, which the great yogis, the death is what they're waiting for. They've been practicing all their lives, going through this process of deconstruction, gradually, dissolving, getting ever more subtle, and then eventually getting to the subtlest level and meditating on emptiness. So the death process is incorporated into these sadhanas. So it's the most perfect way, Rinpoche says, to prepare for death, And why it's important is because the final stage of these 8 stages, known as the clear light mind, we're going to go through the 8 stages, that's the subtlest level of our mind. And that level of consciousness is the most potent, the most capable. And the greatest yogis have been practicing all their lives. And then they can go through the death process effortlessly. And when they get to the clear light mind, which is the subtlest, more subtle than you can get in your own meditation, that's why they've been waiting for death. They've been practicing all their lives. And they get to the very subtle level, then they're able to meditate there, because all the grosser levels have ceased. They're able to utilize that very subtle level of mind, the clear light mind, to not just realize emptiness, but to actually become Buddha, to remove all the obstacles from the mind. So that's why the death is what they've been waiting for, this marvelous opportunity to get to this very subtle level. So the best we can do, if we're not the greatest yogis, is practice it in our sadhanas. And as Lama Zopa says, if we've got a highest yoga practice, we need to do this meditation. You're missing out on the main point of the regeneration stage if you don't do the meditation on going through these 8 stages, bringing the death process into your practice. So it's marvelous technology, put it like that, And as Ami Yeshe says, Tantra is highly technical. So it gives you great confidence that there is amazing yogis basing on Buddha's teachings that know how to work with the process of death and utilize this to actually get enlightened. Not just to die with a happy mind and say goodbye, but it's the time when you can actually get enlightened. And this is what's so brilliant about the Vajrayana system, So we're made up of body and we're made of the mind. The body's made of the 4 elements. So these 8 stages are the gradual deconstruction of these components. So just roughly speaking, various things occur at each of these 8 stages. So the first one there's various things. One of the 5 aggregates ceases, the elements cease, the senses cease, and there's a particular sign or vision in each of these 8 stages. And they're usually labeled in terms of that kind of what they call a vision, as a subtle inner sign, that only when you're a meditator will you notice that. And the interesting thing also is that the process of dying is the same as the process of going to sleep. It's the exact same psychologically and physiologically. So again, the great yogis can utilize their sleep. In other words, the same process of deconstruction occurs every time you go to sleep. And then when you wake up in dreams, that's equivalent to the intermediate state after you've left your body. And then being reborn is equivalent to waking up. Death, of course, is more radical because you wake up in another body, isn't it? So the yogis use these experiences as well. So just keeping it simple, the very first level, the very first stage, the earth element ceases. And so the sign of that is the body gets very heavy, Now, we know this perfectly well when you're very tired. Let's say I'm sitting there, talking to Alona, and my body feels like lead, isn't it? We know that experience because the earth element is ceasing to function. We understand that. Then at the same time, the I consciousness starts to cease to function. We know this experience. I'm really tired. I'm sitting upright. I'm facing Alona. She's talking to me. My eyes are open, but it's sort of like your eyes are glazing over. You can't see anything. We know this experience because your I consciousness is beginning to cease. Then what happens? And there's other things. There's one of the aggregate ceases, and the aggregate of form. So then also they say the feeling is that the body, is like, you kind of feel like falling. You're feeling like you're falling, sinking into the earth. You can even reach up because you feel like you're falling. This is one of the signs of the form aggregate ceasing to function. I remember actually when I was in Delhi, working for Tushita in Delhi in late 80s, I think. And it was the summer, hell on earth, like everybody knows Delhi. I've never known such heat in my life, such constant heat, it was incredible. And I was driving all around Delhi. Somebody lent me their car. They regretted it later. There were so many bumps on it. I love driving in Delhi because Indians drive like I like, which is no rules. This is my best way to drive. So I love driving in Delhi. I haven't driven in Mumbai or anywhere. I don't know about Bangalore. Bangalore seems more relaxed. I don't know. Anyway, the thing was, it was like, so hot. And where I lived at Tushita, we didn't have AC. So I remember I got hepatitis. But I also had malaria, but no one noticed. So I was like living in this complete hallucinating every single day. I could not believe the agony. So I was bright yellow, so people didn't realize I had malaria as well. Until one day, one of my friends came in, she saw me, she recognized a malaria fever, I know I lost like 30 pounds in 10 days, hallucinating. And Kirti Center Rinpoche actually said I was close to death. I mean, you don't know you're close to death. You just feel terrible, right? So anyway, I know that I had Tibetan medicine. And then when they saw the malaria, they put me in a hospital. And anyway, the point is, what I'm saying is, one of my sisters flew to Singapore from Brisbane, round trip, just to pick me up. Luckily, at the time, I don't know if they'd let me fly now, but I remember Air India let me fly, bright yellow. I got a ticket somehow out of India. I knew I'd die otherwise. But the one I'm getting to was, when I was in Singapore, and I'll never forget it, the AC was on. I thought I'd gone to heaven. I could not believe the bliss of this AC. And I was deeply sleeping, but I had this experience of sinking into the bed. So I was really close to death, I got a shock. That's the kind of experience. The earth element, and then the form is ceasing. The I consciousness is ceasing. Then the first of these inner signs, so literally I didn't die, I came back again, here I am. So anyway, the inner sign is this kind of, they say it's like a mirage. And a mirage, isn't it, is the interplay of earth and water, isn't it? Because the next level is the ear consciousness starts to cease. There I am talking to Alona. We know this experience. I'm still sitting upright. My eyes are still open. And I didn't hear the last 10 seconds of what she said. We know this experience because already this deconstruction is occurring. And if you keep going, you'll fall over. We know that, This is the four elements ceasing. This is what happens at death. The ear consciousness goes. The water element begins to dry up, the liquids in the body. Then there's an inner sign of I'm not saying all of them, it doesn't matter. The inner sign is it's like smoky. So it's the interplay, isn't it, of water, and then the next one, which is fire. So the next one is the heat in the body ceases, begins to cease. And it starts to cease from the head down or the feet up. And it all comes gathering to the heart chakra because all the energies are coming to the heart chakra. So then the mentally, by this point, okay, one of the one is, there's a sort of they call it the 5 wisdoms. This is a kind of a capacity of how we function day to day. So the very first one that ceases is the ability to the ability to distinguish. What is it? What's the first one? I forget. Distinguish between different things. There's friend, enemy, and stranger. Yeah. The second one is you can't, I forget now, distinguish between, different experiences of pleasure and pain. I think maybe that's the first. This third one with the fire element, you can't distinguish. No, here it is. You can't distinguish between friend, enemy, and stranger. You might have your beloved auntie on the left on your deathbed and your horrible old father over this side who you hate. I'm just talking, you can't tell the difference. You've lost the plot. You know, your mind is ceasing to function, ceasing. You're getting smaller. The body is ceasing. The sensory consciousness, which is the grosser consciousness, is ceasing. And so and you're losing the plot to how to put things together, you know. Then by the fourth one, so the sign there is like sparks. The fourth one is your the ability to even know who you are. This is gone. You can't tell, you hear any word, you can't hear, you can't put meaning. You have no longer the ability to put meaning, you know. The breath stops, the breath goes out and doesn't go in. And that's the air element. And then the inner sign is, like they say, it's like the light, like the sort of the bright around the candle when the candle goes out. But before this is a crucial point now. Before, there's another series of things happening that plays out during this process, and this is called the 12 links of dependent arising, as taught in the sutras. So Lama Zopa talks about this process of the 12 links specifically in relation to death. So by about the third point, where you've still got your wits about you, you can still kind of think a few things by the third of these 4 stages. Already what's happening is the 12 links, they occur every second of the day, but at the time of death, they play a very particular role. So the 8th one is called craving, which is just attachment. It drives us every second of the day. Then the 9th one is called grasping, which is an even more intense level of attachment. So this is the difficulty at the time of death. These are going to happen even for the greatest yogis. So, you know, if you've never practiced, never thought about death, living in denial, most people die with fear because they haven't thought about death and they don't have dear friends helping them die. Then you're going to have a lot of fear because you're grasping at this one. So this grasping kicks in, and that grasping, the 9th one, this intense level of attachment, is the trigger for the number 2 link, which is the karmic seed that will be the one among the billions of karmic seeds from every action you've ever done that haven't yet ripened, that you're carrying around in your bank vault. The number 2 link is the karmic seed that will be the one that is triggered by that grasping that will already determine your next life. This is happening even before you stop breathing. Your next life is already programmed before you even stop breathing. This is why at this point is when you need most people to help you navigate this, which means to have your practice, to be aware of death, to hear the name of your lamas, to have the practices that you love hearing, so that you can be steady and calm and you can navigate this experience, you know, and die with a happy mind. So basically, if that grasping overrides everything else, that will trigger a negative karmic seed. And that means the death process itself from here will be very, very fearful. And you can tell people for whom a negative karmic seed has been triggered, which means they're going to get a suffering rebirth, like in the lower realms. It is very evident that some of the different signs, as Lama Zopa says, and I have friends who sit with dying people who've seen this, you know, if the negative seed is triggered and you haven't stopped breathing yet, you've still got your wits about you, you can still move, then it is horrific experience. You can because you're seeing, your mind is getting more subtle and you can see the future life, you know, coming. So it's a very horrific experience, very terrifying. But if a virtuous karmic seed is triggered, you will be radiant, you will be joyful, you will be blissful. They even say in the texts that if a negative seed is triggered, it's like going towards the darkness. And if a positive seed is triggered, the experiences of going towards the light. A friend of mine, an Australian who was married to a woman in California at our center, Vajrapani, back in the 80s, he was working on the roof of the Gompa there, doing some work at the center, and he fell off the roof and he was dying. In her arms, he died. And she said he was radiant, blissful. Many people die like that. And that's because a virtuous karmic seed is triggered, you know. So that by the time you stop breathing, that's when the materialist world thinks you're dead, but you're not dead yet. Your subtle mind is still now functioning. So that's equivalent to the dream state. The bardo is also like that when you leave the body, but even at this one, every time you go to sleep, this same process occurs. It's not as dramatic because you don't stop breathing altogether, but then you wake up in a dream state, don't you? That's your subtle mind. This first level is known as your gross mind ceasing. Now your subtle mind, which is all your subtle mental states that course through all the 72,000 subtle channels in your body with all the different wind energies. So those wind energies gradually cease, and different things occur physically in this process. There's so much to talk about, but what time is it?
It's
Oh, we've got
30
30 minutes.
Yeah.
No, we're okay. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
so I can't say too much. There's so much to talk about, but we can't say too much. Maybe we have to have another day on the death process. So I'll just say briefly. So then from this point, you can be up to 3 days before you actually your mind leaves the body, which is a whole discussion. You know, it's a whole different discussion. This one is very, very fascinating. So, so after 3 days, this is why the best for the Tibetan Buddhist system is you leave the body for 3 days all time. And then and there are certain signs that show the mind has gone, then you can cremate the body or do whatever you want to do, you know. And then, of course, depending on the karma that was triggered, the mind will leave the body and it will go into an intermediate state, which is like a dream state, exactly like a dream state. And then when the time is right, if you've got a human body coming, then when mummy and daddy hop into bed, then, you know, you'll run like a magnet and you'll hop in and off you go, next life. So I think you better ask me some questions now. Okay. Any questions you like? Come on, people.
Venerable, this was fascinating. If there are not many questions, maybe we could continue, because honestly, this was...
No, there's no time to do it in 1 hour. We have to have another discussion. Of course, we can do that. I'm very happy.
Yeah.
And I can send you some course notes. I mean, I really recommend getting this book, but I can also, I've prepared some course notes for courses that I do on this topic, extracting some of the chapters from the book, but I highly recommend you get the book. And I can send you those course notes for people. Okay. So any questions, darling people? Alona has a question. Yes.
Hi, Venerable. Thank you for your teaching.
Yes.
I was wondering about this. When we fall in sleep, does our mind goes to that clear light place?
No.
Do we get
not
no?
Yet, not yet. No, it does. The process, of course, is exactly the same as when you die. And so when you go to the very deepest sleep, and you can say the mind goes to the subtlest level, but it's not nearly it. Yes, indeed, it does. In fact, forgive me, but not just when you're falling asleep. That's still quite gross. It's only when you go through the subtle stages and even your subtle mind ceases and you can go mind. Yes, there is the clear light experience, but you won't be aware of it. Just the falling asleep is not the clear light. It's way more subtle than that. Only if you've got single-pointed concentration can you become familiar with the clear light mind, and that's even difficult. It's not just the falling asleep, it's way more subtle. The clear light mind, yes, but it's way more subtle than just the feeling of falling asleep. Do you understand my question? Do you understand my answer?
Yes, yes.
That's all? What was the reason you asked the question?
I've heard a lot of teachings about clear light place, and I was always wondering.
Sorry, what? Sorry, what?
I've heard about teachings about clear light. The mind goes into clear light place, and I was always wondering what is that place, and do we experience every time we go deep to sleep, or how, like I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah, of course, but you're not aware of it. You're not aware. You have to practice to become aware of it. Yes, absolutely.
How do we practice? Okay. Is through meditation?
Well, sweetheart, what do you think? How do you practice? Where do you think I've got this information from? All the teachings and the technology, it's all there, darling. What do you mean, how do you practice it? It must be all written down in books, mustn't it? It must be all in books. Do you agree?
Yes.
Well, then, I've already told you one book. Start there.
I have that
darling.
Book.
Good, sweetheart. Good. Okay. Yes, Subhashini, talk to me. Yes. I can't hear you, my dear. What's happening to Subhashini? I can't hear.
Yeah, I think she might have a problem with the mic because she's unmuted, but she's not speaking.
I understand. So maybe while she's organizing herself, if there's somebody else. Nobody else. Anyway. Nobody else has got a question.
Venerable, somebody was asking the name of the book by Lama Zopa Rinpoche.
How to Face Death Without Fear.
How to Face Death Without Fear, yes.
Yes. There was an earlier version published by Wisdom that isn't so well organized, and that was called How to Enjoy Death. It's the same information, but not so well organized. They re-edited it, but the best one is How to Face Death Without Fear. I think it's also a digital book published by Wisdom. Yes, Priyanka, talk to me.
I just feel so grateful for your teaching. I watched some of your YouTube talks on anger, and they really helped me a lot. And I'm so grateful that I can talk to you face to face. It's
so happy.
Unbelievable. Thank you so much for giving us this teaching.
I'm happy.
My question is, like for me, at least, this is true that I'm not really afraid of death as such, like I'm going to disappear. I'm not afraid of that. what I am really afraid of is the pain, because
Nice.
most people usually die with a lot of pain.
Yes,
How
yes.
can I deal with that and practice?
I understand, Priyanka. That's a very common thing. Many people say that. Many people say that. But it doesn't follow. I mean, not everybody dies with pain, do they? You know, some people die straight away, quickly, and that's not the good way to die. The best way to die is to die slowly, meaning to be knowing you're old and dying, or have time to prepare. So Rinpoche's book, for example, it's the main information, the practical information of what to do. And of course, it's all framed in terms of helping your loved one. The months and weeks before death, the days before death, the hours before death, the time the breath stops, after the breath stops, when the mind leaves, and then the 7 weeks after the mind has left. So it's in chronological order, you know. So I think, yes. So, I mean, what can I say? Okay. Lots of people do die with a lot of pain because they get sick. It's absolutely true. So that there's many things, but one of the key things is to, it's really important to be as conscious as possible when you die. Well, it's not, if I'm unconscious or I die in my sleep, I don't want to know about it. But it doesn't work like that. The mind needs to be engaging in the process. You need to be conscious that you're dying and aware of it and accepting it, because much of the suffering does come from the mental one, actually. So, of course, the pain one is unbearable. So, but I mean, these days, there's so many brilliant drugs, you know, and if you've got good care, but the key point is to find sort of to navigate some place in between being totally unconscious and living in agony. You've got to, you know, and I think so that's one point. You really need to have good care and to be but I think much of the suffering is mental. I mean, of course, the pain is horrible. We think of that, but so much of the suffering people have at death is not physical. It's just this mental anguish. And this is the part of the problem with drugs with respect to us in our modern medical systems. We think, you know, if you drug a person, oh, she looks so peaceful because she's completely unconscious. But we all know perfectly well, you could be sleeping in bed looking peaceful, but you'd be having a nightmare. So being in a coma or being unconscious is exactly the same as a dream state. It's the subtle mind. So if your mind is full of fear and you're drugged out of your brain, you'll have dreams that are full of fear. Your mind suddenly won't become peaceful because you've got drugs. So it's really important to be aware of this, and then during your care to make sure you've got this balance between the drugs that help you alleviate the pain, but not so that you become unconscious. All I can do is say that. But the other one is this, Priyanka. If we really practice every day and do purification practice every day, live in our vows every day, then, you know, it's like you're preparing for a happy death. You're preparing for a good death, you know. So you can't guarantee it'll happen, but by preparing every day, by purifying your mind and practicing compassion every day, and then, you know, you're preparing yourself. It's not as if a bad death just comes out of the blue. You can prepare for a good death. So, you know, just all you can do is hope for that and pray for that. And then know that if you're going to be in pain, I mean, I think these days there's so many good drugs, you know, I don't know. Do you understand, Priyanka? Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, sweetheart. So, Subhashini, can I get you yet? Can you talk to me yet?
I'm not. Okay.
Here you go. I can hear you now. Come on.
I wanted to. First of all, I want to wish you a happy Teachers' Day. Today is Teachers' Day here, so I wanted to wish you happy Teachers' Day. The question
good. Thank you. How can I help?
The question is that we are scared of death because we don't know what is after that. Because we don't know.
No, of course we don't. But I mean, we've also got people who do know. So it's up to whom we trust, isn't it? I mean, that's up to decide. That's for us to decide, isn't it? I mean, if we're clairvoyant, then we can see. But if we've got faith in a creator and we believe in going to heaven, then that will give us confidence. If we have faith in karma, then that will give us confidence too. But the main reason, Lama Zopa says, the main reason for fear is just primordial. It's primordial fear because of attachment, not wanting to leave this body. No, it's a good point, absolutely. But it's up to us.
How does one get rid of it? How does one get rid of it?
Get rid of what?
How does one get rid of this attachment to this
I
life.
practice Dharma every day. That's what Dharma is. Understanding what attachment is, understanding impermanence, letting go of grasping. This is what practice is every day. You don't wait. I mean, that's what practice is, Subhashini. That's what Buddhist practice is. Giving up attachment, giving up anger, giving up fear, giving up grasping at permanence. That's exactly what practice is. And then we'll be ready for death. And then secondly, living your life according to morality, living a good ethical life. Don't kill, don't steal, living your vows, do your practice every day. And then death will be a happy experience. This is logical. That's the
How do
answer.
you conquer the fear of what is the unknown?
I said it before. It's up to you. If you're not clairvoyant, then it's up to you to decide, if you have confidence in a certain system. So the Buddhist view would tell you your mind will continue, you get a human rebirth. The Christians will tell you you'll go to heaven. It's up to you to decide which system you would like to study and think about and have confidence in. That's your choice. Then when you have confidence, you can look forward. If you're a Christian, for example, let's just say, then they have great faith in God. They believe they're going to go to heaven, so they'll die a happy death. They look forward to going to heaven. If you have confidence in the Buddhist teachings, if you've got confidence, that's up to you to decide which teachings you want to have confidence in. Then you will, you'll look forward to your next human rebirth. Now, if you're a good person, if you don't have any religious view, but maybe you're a good human being who has no fear of death, then you will die a happy death anyway. I mean, many people who are secular die happy deaths because they're content. So living a life of good ethics is the way to stop fear, whatever will happen in the future. So that's up to us, Subhashini, which system we'd like to buy into, but the crucial one is to live a good life. Because if you live a good life of ethics, your mind will not be fearful. You'll accept and you'll die happily.
I am an ethical person, but even then I'm scared.
What did you say, Subhashini? What did you say?
I said I am an ethical person.
Yes.
I've lived my life ethically, but
Good.
even then there is a scare.
Well,
fear.
I understand we're all the same, and at least you see it. All we can do, it's not going to go away like magic, Subhashini, but all we can do is, the fear is irrational because we're attached, and the fear is based on grasping at things as permanent. I can only give you the Buddhist analysis, and that's up to you. And then all you can do is keep applying it, because it's natural. Being afraid of something that will happen, that's going to happen anyway, is kind of foolish. We all do it. I know, it's a good point. But all you can do is think of reality. That's the Buddhist approach. You think of how things are impermanent, and realize it's normal. And then look at the attachment. The fear comes from attachment. It's so deep. Subhashini, it's such a good point. It's easy to say all these words that I'm saying, but all we can do is try to apply these. It's a good point, Subhashini. At least you're being so honest to say it, These antidotes, it's up to us. Other questions? Are there other questions there? Two people have raised.
Venerable, it was me. So if I could ask a question. Venerable, you said the sleep process is the same as the death process. Do you mean exactly the same, or it's similar?
Exactly. No, exactly the same, but not as radical, because you wake up in the same body. So in other words, when you stop breathing, that's the first 4 stages have ceased when you die. But when you stop breathing and become unconscious at sleep, you're still breathing. So death is just more radical, that's all. But it's the same deconstruction of the same components. And when you go to sleep, that's like dying. Then when you wake up in the dream, that's like, intermediate state. And then when you wake up and you're back into your body again next morning, that's like being reborn. It's not even an analogy. It's literally the same. But the difference, of course, is you wake up in another body. But the same deconstruction of the components. That's why the yogis can use this as preparation for death.
So by that analogy, Venerable, if you are a good lucid dreamer, if you've been practicing lucid dreaming,
yes,
would you be, is there a higher chance of you being conscious in the Bartho?
Well, but yes, you could say that, but it's far more technical than that. The way to practice, lucid dreaming is helpful because it means you're conscious when you're dreaming. But it can also be just we can get attached to that. There's no benefit in that. I know some people who talk about this dream, they can even, the husband and wife, they even talk to each other. They're so attached to this idea of it being something special. It's just rubbish. They're attached, there's no benefit in that. But yes, of course, it is an advantage to be conscious that you're dreaming. Absolutely. But the point is, you've got to combine it with ethics and living in your, and then you've got to combine it with doing your single pointed concentration meditation. And then you combine it with the 8 stages, with your sadhana practice, with your deity practice. That's where it's totally integrated, where you're combining it with your deity practice in highest yoga tantra. And you can then incorporate these different stages where you utilize, you're purifying ordinary death, ordinary intermediate state, and ordinary rebirth into the path to enlightenment. It's really technical and brilliant. So that's the perfect method to utilize all of this. That's the perfect method to combine the death process with the practice so that you can get enlightened. That's the best way. Do you understand?
Yes, Venerable. Thank you so much.
Good. What else, people? But Subhashini's point is the one we can have much tantric practice as we like. If we don't think about impermanence every single day and understand logically that we are impermanent, which is what will counteract the fear. The fear is there because we can't stand the thought of dying. So it's just instinctive. We're going to counteract that by realizing we are impermanent and we will die. We've got to face the facts, and that cuts the fear. What else, people? Other questions? We have 10 minutes to go. 12 minutes to go. Yes. Himarama Krishna, talk to me.
We do this. This is my very first Zoom meeting.
Oh, good Lord. I hope it's interesting.
Very first.
Wonderful.
I'm 76, and this is my first Zoom meeting because I'm terrified of Zoom meetings.
Well, are you enjoying this Zoom meeting?
Yeah, I'm enjoying what you're saying so much.
Good.
Okay. So, well, the process and then the stages, one would like to hear more of that because, as you say brilliantly, the technology is too much. It's fascinating.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
A new way of looking at it.
Yes.
It is a new way of projecting death.
Yes.
So we need to hear more of that. We need to hear more of that.
Good. I think we need to have another session.
Mm.
We can go into it more deeply. I would like to do that. Yes, we will definitely do that.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
All right. Good. I'm so happy. Okay. What else, people? In our few minutes left, what shall we discuss? There's so much to discuss, actually. Let me just, Lakme looks like he wants to ask a question. Lakme, you about to ask a question? No? No, okay, that's fine. So listen, I think one topic, go.
Sorry, Venerable, there was a question in the chat, if I could ask.
Please. Yes,
so somebody saying, Namaste, Venerable Robina. How can I help my old sick father to have a good death? He's a bit lost right now.
He's what?
He's a bit lost.
Yes, exactly. This is the one. This is what's most important. This is why we also need to talk more. Because exactly as Subhashini says, we all have this fear, just so primordial. And if we've never talked about death, and that's often what happens, we don't want to talk about it. It's too painful. But as we're getting older, we know we're getting towards death, So then if we don't have it, this is where, it depends on, first of all, it depends on your viewpoint. So if your father, for example, is a devoted, I don't know, he has his own devoted religion and he's got a very strong view and he's got confidence in that view of what will happen to his mind when he dies, then already you can help him hugely, whether he's a Christian, a Muslim, whatever it might be, But if he's got no particular view and he doesn't know what's going to happen, that's Subhashini's point, and he's living in fear because of that, then all he can do is be aware of where he is at, and then learn to know how to be close to him, to be loving to him. You can't force him to listen to words he doesn't want to hear. So you've got to take the lead from him. So the main job, the key job we have to do, whether it's your dog, your father, whether they're devoted, whether they're not, whether they have a view, whether they not have a view, is to help them be peaceful. Because if the mind is peaceful, the mind can be virtuous. If the mind is peaceful, that state of being peaceful naturally at the time of death naturally triggers one of your virtuous karmic seeds, which will mean death will be peaceful and you will get a nice, decent, new future human rebirth. This is the Buddhist approach. But if you're freaking out, then that triggers a negative seed, So the key thing, Like I said, if your father, an animal, is to help them be peaceful. That means just to love your father. You take the lead from how he talks, where he's coming from. You can't force information down his throat, but you make the environment, if you're going to be with him as he's getting sicker and older, you've got to make all this is in the book. We have to talk more. You've got to make the environment peaceful, make it beautiful. Usually sick rooms look so ugly, full of rubbish and mess and dark with the curtains down. It's got to be a beautiful environment. Like, you know, if he's sick and old and he's in bed every day, you've got to have the windows open so you can see the sky. The mind has to be spacious. If he's got devoted to a certain, you know, like say he's a Buddhist, you have images of the Buddha. Everything, when his eyes are open, everything he sees should help his mind. When he hears things, this is a whole other, we could spend 1 hour just talking about this. Even if a person's in a coma, the sound of prayers and mantras playing is the most marvelous gift you can give, especially to your little animal who can do nothing for themselves. This leaves very powerful imprints in their mind. And even if they're in a coma, they can be conscious of it. You know, this is one of the most precious things, to have a very peaceful, even if it's not religious, you know, you can play these beautiful mantras very quietly in the room, low key, all the time. When they're asleep, it helps the mind be peaceful. It's to make the place beautiful, the environment very spacious. You keep the troublemakers out. You don't have all the dramas and the kids screaming and yelling and the people fighting or shouting about the will. I mean, you make the environment beautiful. Everything is to help the person be peaceful and therefore virtuous. This is the major point, you know, and from there, as to what you talk about, that's up to what your father wants to talk about, you know. So there's so many things we need to discuss this more. We haven't got time today. We will do another day, definitely. And I'll use Lama Zopa's book as my basis, you know, because everybody's going to have somebody die, and we all want to help. Even if our pet, we want to help. So many people I knew when I do these courses, so many people come who aren't even Buddhist because they somehow trust the Buddhist view. People want to help their animals at the time of death, you know. I remember coming to some of the courses, funeral home directors would come because they're totally into death, you know. So it's a really important discussion. But the main thing is to help them be peaceful. And if your father he's got his worries, he doesn't know what he thinks, just love him, praise him. There's so many practices Rinpoche gives, and one of them is tell him his good qualities. Tell your father what a wonderful job he's done. Most of us think we're bad. At death, we've got so much anxiety. We don't think we've done a good job. We have all this guilt. You tell him what a good man he is, what a good life he's done, what a good father he's been. You calm his mind down. You alleviate his fears. You make him feel loved and cared for. This is the most precious gift. I mean, look at all these, I don't know about India, but in the old people's homes in the West, they're just so hideous, some of them. People are just drugged out of their brains and treated like vegetables, you know. And you can think even then, even the cleaning lady could be the one who's the kindest, just to give a bit of love to the person who's dying there, you know. This is so important, because the way you die determines the karmic seed that is triggered, which determines your future life. So you've got to make the conditions totally conducive for that, you know. This is the key point. What else, people?
Somebody is asking an extension of the same, that he works in an oncology department in the hospital, and he has many patients sick and dying.
Yes.
And they may not be a Buddhist. What can he
of
do
course.
for this person? Yeah.
Say what?
So what can they for? So what
This
can
is the
he
point,
do
I think,
for
as I was saying before, you know, if you're in a hospital, if you're on one of the front line, you know, your job is to be, I mean, apart from giving the medicine and all this, your job is to be loving, to be kind, to look the person in the eye, to make them feel like they're somehow worthy, to praise them, to love them, to care for them, so the mind calms down. This is the most precious gift you can give. Doesn't even matter what you talk about, just to praise them, love them, smile, tell them everything is okay, soothe them as much as you can, apart from the medical side, you know. This is what's important. And of course, you can't do much in a hospital. I mean, in one way, you could argue, all due respect to kind doctors and nurses, hospitals are about the worst place to die, because as you're dying, and people know this, your mind becomes incredibly sensitive to the tiniest noises. So there you are in a hospital, in a ward, maybe in your own room, you're okay, but there's banging and loud and other people's dramas and noises and emotion. The mind can be so distressed, because we can't even control our minds when we're wide awake and young and healthy. So at the time of death, when our mind is so fragile and we're moving towards death, then the tiniest disturbance can be so distressing. So the ideal scenario would be in a room on your own with beautiful views, very peaceful environment, the sound of mantras. Everything should be conducive for that person to be peaceful. And being on drugs doesn't mean they're peaceful, you know. Of course, it's one of the tools we use, unfortunately, these days, because it must be difficult to deal with people's emotions and dramas. And if they're sitting there quietly drugged out of their brain, they're easier to manage, with respect. But it doesn't mean their mind is peaceful. So give them love. That's what you can do, and kindness, and calm their mind down. Let them feel it's okay. Let them feel there's nothing to worry about. Praise them. Thank them for their goodness. This is an immediate gift to people, I tell you. We need to talk more, okay? We'll have another day. You work out when you want it to be next week, and we can delay the other talk. We'll have more next week, I think. It'd be best, wouldn't it? Don't you think?
Okay, Venerable. Okay, I'll reschedule it. Yeah, okay.
It's a minefield. I mean, you can see once it starts, and I mean, I absolutely have to talk about the whole business of giving organs. It's a really important topic. So much comes up, and there's a very marvelous topic. We need it, you know, very badly. So let's do next week as well, okay?
Sure, Venerable. I'll reschedule.
All right, darling people. So I encourage you to get Lama Zopa's book and get His Holiness's book called The Mind of Clear Light. But Lama Zopa's is full of practical advice as well. You know, what to do, all the things I'm telling you now in his book, you know, how to face death without fear. I should be published in India. I don't know why they're not doing that. Maybe they are, I don't know. Okay, dearest ones, keep moving. Remember you're impermanent, but be happy about it. And then think not to waste my life. Not, oh my God, what's the point? I'm going to die. No. Don't waste your life. It gives you energy and enthusiasm. That's the thing. That's the key conclusion. Okay, darling people. Thank you so much. Jang Chub, Sem Chog Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Guchig, Ke Panyam Pam Me Payang, Gong Ne Gong Du Peba Shog. Thank you, darling people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Bye, sweethearts.
Thank you.